and go back to school. So when I was at school, I was undiagnosed but dyslexic. So lots of ability, but not much outcome. And within that, I guess always trying to find like where my output could be put. And I think if I look back age 42 on that now, I think I was just curious about everything. And I think that's a pretty good outcome for someone that's involved in the world of branding. So when I was at school, I was lucky enough to get a work experience organised at a graphic design agency in my hometown, which was very small, doing leaflets for the council. But it ignited a passion that was amazing from that moment onwards, which I was very lucky for. So from that age 16, kind of set my sights on working in the industry. So went through the normal route of foundation and degree, and then post-degree moved to London and worked in a series of agencies. And I think, you know, I'm on record to have said this in other talks and articles I've done and everything. It wasn't exactly plain sailing. I found being a junior designer really hard. I think there's a lot of junior design which is about one-way communication, particularly 20 years ago, where I worked for a couple of people which were quite hard individuals, and then it was kind of like a bit more stick and carrot. And so within that, plenty of opportunities and times where I did wonder whether it was the right career for me. But got going after a while and worked for a number of different agencies. And I think in that time went through a period of seeing a lot of change in the industry, and a lot of change obviously in the world generally, but in the industry particularly, in terms of like what was expected from us. And I think the way I always used to think about it was that I thought that graphic design 20 years ago, we were the end of the line where people would give us quite often a pack of information or a pack of stuff, and it's like, go and make that look good, or go and make that presentable, or go and make that communicative in some kind of way. And I think as my career's gone on, I've realized that actually we as an industry belong further up that conversation, where you start to talk to people and have more of a kind of like influence over what people are trying to do. And so on that journey as I become more senior in my various roles, have more ability to be able to influence what we're doing in terms of who we work for, what I think, and over that time learn my craft, but also started to build some hypotheses around what I think the potential and role can be for people in the branding space, the influence, positivity we can have on the companies that we work with, the way that we can navigate those very difficult situations. And I think if I go back to the beginning of my career, it's a lot of stuff that I maybe just felt rather than realised. And the more that I have worked with people, the more I've put a kind of structure or a theory on top of that, which the result of that is Koto. So hopefully that answers your question. It maybe does a little bit.
That's really interesting, going back to the idea of, you know, the junior roles and struggling with that. That's really sort of, I felt that myself, very much dictated to, or it was like you were being beaten on. It was, you know, it was just a way of the boss letting out their frustration, and how much that sort of made me sort of end up love hating something that I wanted to love even more. But I was just like, I don't know if this is where I want to get to, and it, you know, how that can, you know, that mental sort of ship level, or that, you know, early phase level, you know, the educational sort of level in the industry. How that, I don't know if that's still prevalent in places, but how negative that was on me.
Yeah, I think anecdotally, I think it is still prevalent for whatever reason. I think there's a really interesting side of our industry, which is because we deal in the grey area. There's no right or wrong. There's no black or white. We've just got a lot of opinions about stuff and a lot of hypotheses and a lot of possibilities. Is that I think that for a certain kind of individual, that lets them look to their own surety. And that comes out as kind of like dominance. And I think, you know, being self-reflective enough, I'm pretty sure about my my own kind of like opinions on stuff. And you have to be careful not to temper those sometimes, because you want everyone to work at different speeds, but at the same time you also know that you need a certain amount of velocity, because we're working in the creative industry with a lot of expectation around us in terms of people that we work with. You know, almost all my clients are ASAP on everything they want. You know, a lot of them are tech companies that have got venture funding, and they're getting a lot of pressure from their investors, and so therefore that pressure is kind of manifest onto me. And I think if we're younger people in that role, it's probably quite hard, because they're, you know, particularly I think where the industry has moved on, but I don't think education has necessarily moved on at the same time as the industry has as well. And so I think there's kind of like two outcomes in the industry. One is like, in the education, which is one is that people were looking to protect people and so keep them from the bad world of industry. And then the other one is doing their best to try and prepare those people for the world of work, but then not necessarily themselves having been exposed to the world of work, so being a bit blind in the way that they do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's a fascinating thing, because my worry has always been that we lose a lot of people in our industry at different points because they have like a bad period, or and that love-hate thing that you mentioned there. And actually sometimes all people need to do is change it up, go somewhere else, do something different, and that change in circumstance can change process, can change frustration, I think.
Yeah, and it's also nice to know that you also get the ASAP thing. I think sometimes you sort of see what we class as like the look upon these really glamorous agencies like you. Well, it's easy to do that. You have all the people presume you have all the time in the world, and it's not. We all get that pressure, which is good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, modern disease, that one.
It's reassuring in some sort of strange way. It's in a bit of a twisted way. But what I find really interesting what you're saying there is about the idea of design being this endpoint of somebody. I've had it a lot of times in the past where you maybe work for an organisation like a council that doesn't necessarily always understand the point of design, as opposed to it just being a thing to put on a leaflet. That they just throw a load of words at you and not want to communicate what that might be. I really find that fascinating, that point where you step into this conversation way earlier than that. The creative is sort of secondary in some respects at the end. It makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? But having those conversations at the start. And is there a way that you do that? Is that just by trying to find the clients that allow you to do that, or is that just by stumping your ability and the success you've had in the past on a potential client?
There's no magic bullet. I wish there was. I think we try and have that conversation as soon as possible with the people we work with to kind of show that value. So it's the story around the work and what the work can do. We also work with a lot of tech companies where they don't have a marketing department yet, or any of the kind of like things that kind of create those kind of outcome funnels. And so you can have much more honest conversations with those people and say, look, there's a lot more we can do here. This is what the impact on this can be, and kind of tell that story. There's the history of both my personal and my company's success as well, in terms of like who we've done that before, which can convince people. And the downside of it all is that you're stepping into people's vulnerabilities a lot more, which is an interesting place to find yourself. I literally, before doing this talk today, was just on a call with a founder who's getting very worried that he's making the right decisions around his brand, because his brand's really important to him. He's got a small company, invested a lot of time and effort into it, and he's worried that the change will see a drop off in his customers, or people will be scared by it, And so I think if you do get to that earlier stage and you have that ability to be able to impact someone's businesses and like pull into these different areas, there's like bigger stakes with it, and people are more worried. And so therefore I think the potential for communication breakdown, the potential for things to go wrong, etc., can be harder. There's a George Bernard Shaw quote, which I'm probably going to get wrong right now, which is quite funny, but which really always sticks in my mind, which I read quite a while ago, which is the biggest misconception about communication is the illusion that it took place in the first place. And I think for me, that kind of is at the stem of all the challenges and problems that I've had, is that we think we've said something, or we've communicated something, or we've presented something, we've talked about something, and it either wasn't what they were expecting, we've got barked up the wrong tree, we've done the wrong thing, etc., in that way. And so I'm always looking to try and build those bridges as early as I can. And the only way to do that is to over communicate, which for some people is really irritating, because they've got 40, 50 hours in a week, and the last thing they want to do is spend 5 of them talking to me about whatever we're working on. They want to actually be getting on with the rest of their business, and they've got that thing that needs doing, and I've just got that branding company and they're going to get on with it, so I can get on with everything else. And so there is no kind of like smooth way of doing it. It's more about an aim for me. It's more about trying to do it all the time, even if we do fail sometimes.
Yeah, I suppose that also comes back to that education, maybe, doesn't it, with people to understand that it is that is something that needs to be addressed or questioned or challenged, etc., to get the best results, as opposed to
in a world where people hate to be educated.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Just going moving back in line with now you've come up to the point of Koto. Can you just tell us a bit more about the origins of how that started, James? Is that a burning desire to do something after being within the industry for a while, to do it your way? Was that a vision? Was that a team effort? How did that come about, and what was the sort of foundations for that to launch it?
So I've been thinking about starting my own thing for quite a few years beforehand, and I think there was kind of like a few things going on that had stopped me, which was one, I felt like the industry was changing quite a bit in front of me, and I wanted to be best placed to be able to do that change. And so one thing I did was I took some quite different roles in leadership. So I went to man versus machine for a bit. We've got much more kind of 3D moving image, VFX kind of work. And that was just to kind of really get on top of the world of motion, to feel confident in that area. I joined Design Studio was my last job, working for someone else before this, because I felt like there was a good challenge there, which there was a successful company, but it wasn't hitting itself in the world of branding in the way that it now does. And so I went there to help them build that kind of brand arm of their business. And in a way, I saw that as a good opportunity for me able to test myself and the things I had on someone else's dollar, if I'm honest. And then when I was there, I did the Airbnb rebrand, and that was kind of like the magic moment for me, where I was like, right, I think I've got to the point now where, and that was about 13 years into my career, where I had a hypothesis about the way that I thought this should be done. I'd learned lots of things of working for other people, which were both positive and negative in terms of, and that was kind of like around people management, that was around financial things, that was around creative outcomes, that was in terms of processes, all that kind of stuff. And so I felt like I had a hypothesis about what could be a successful company. I also felt as well, when I wanted to start something, I didn't want to just be like, and there's nothing wrong with this kind of agency, but for me personally, I didn't want to be like 3 or 4 people for a long time. I wanted to kind of be up doing the biggest kind of projects, because I've always passionately felt that there was this really weird divide in the industry, which you had the big agencies that they did the big jobs and they had a really good idea, and there's this big idea in the middle of the brand, but then they always rushed all the little details, and they didn't necessarily get their typography sorted, or they weren't like getting all these bits working, and and there's a total place for those kind of companies. But the Interbrands and the future brands of this world, I'd always look at their case studies and be like, it's almost there, but if you just spent a little bit more time on it, it would have been great. But probably for financial reasons, couldn't do that. I'd also worked with some big agencies where they'd spent a lot of time on strategy, and then creative was also like kind of squished at the end, and so I wanted to see more balance. The flip side of that is I'd worked for some good ones, and I knew a lot of really good agencies who were absolute craft masters, but didn't necessarily pick themselves up and go, I can go and do the biggest work, because they felt wrongly, I felt that they had this kind of area where they belonged, which was a comfort in doing cultural work, or an interest in doing work that kind of like was seen to be crafted, doing like, maybe it's like craft food and beverage work or whatever. And I just thought like I could close that space. And so that's my aim. And I don't think I've necessarily closed it, but that's my kind of like my burning passion, which is, I don't think that the world's biggest branding jobs should be above craft, care, attention, and all the things that you need to do. And so I want to try and make that kind of connection on that front. It's consciously not called Greenfield, Matthews and Roden, because I don't like companies that have creative figureheads and then the people that work for them have no identity that exists within it. I think it's a very old-fashioned way of thinking about stuff. I think you could argue it's patriarchal as well. I think if you want people to come and work for you and for them to be empowered, engaged, believe in the vision and everything you're trying to set out, you have to put your own ego to one side and set space for them to feel like they can belong to something. I wanted it to have its own identity, which was clear and could be an identity on its own. I don't know why, but I think a lot of agencies have a purposely anonymous identity, because I think they feel like the work should do the talking. And as much as I agree with that on a kind of slight principle, I was very keen on us making sure that we had an identity that felt like it had as much vigor as the identity that we wanted other people to have. I felt like a really weird disbalance. And so within that, I spent a lot of time thinking about the name. I feel like I've worked for a couple of companies who came up with their name in 5 minutes, and I've always thought it's really weird, because it's like, I do a lot of new business calls, because obviously a lot of them go nowhere. I spend my time introducing us day in, day out, and if the name was just something I thought up for like 5 seconds, you got to live with that forever. Yeah, it just seems a bit like we wouldn't advise our clients to do that, so why are we doing it ourselves? So I spent a lot of time on that. And then the kind of real fact of why I started was unfortunately, my old man had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I wanted him to see me start it before he went. And in a way, it was a weird kind of pushing mechanism, but it was also a quite powerful pushing mechanism, because that made me put caution to the wind and just go for it.
Yeah, that's incredible, really, really powerful, because I asked those similar sort of questions to a lot of people privately, as well as during some of these online sessions. And it can be quite as simple as, I just wanted to work for myself, or it can be, I just didn't like being told what to do. Like, it's sort of very basic sort of things, but like everything that you mentioned there is quite pertinent in terms of, especially that idea of trying to bridge the industry or parts, or put it together. Because correctly, there's a lot of people that you see do crazily good craft work, but there seems to be some sort of pride in being niche or hidden, or and it's very tucked away, and you have to go and really find it, which is it's a shame, because it's good to see. It's nice to see. It's refreshing and invigorating. But yeah, no, I agree. No, I say it quite a lot about your identity. Is this? We talk a lot to businesses or customers about giving them a personality, don't we, or an identity, or giving them an attitude, or whatever it might be. If you've got none of that yourself, it seems it comes from a bit of a false place, or you're just sort of reading off the script of what everyone tells you should be doing, having the same opening paragraph to your website as everyone else. So moving forward, great to know more about the team, and who is obviously figurehead yourself, James, as the founder, but from the perspective of who, the creative team, and across the different sites that you've got, and the culture that you grow. I know you've probably pretty much touched on that, but is there much more? Is it really the best people for the job? Is it do they fit within a mold? Do they fit within something that you've grown, or is it quite an organic process?
It's quite organic in a way. It's an interesting one, because I think most people at times are guilty of revisionist history, where they will say to you, I had this plan to do X or do Y, and as much as I kind of like going back on what I just said then, I didn't want to kind of be like a 3 or 4 person studio. I don't think I could have 6.5 years ago told you we would have been here in these cities doing this thing, working in this way. And so in terms of the way it works at the moment, we've got 30 odd people in London, 20 odd people in LA, and then 10 people in Berlin. We chose LA consciously because we think that it's going to change as a city, and we want to be in a position to be able to help facilitate that change. There's been a really interesting outcome in the last kind of 10, 15 years, which is Hollywood films aren't making the money they used to make. And so therefore, a lot of people that you previously would just invest in Hollywood films, expect a return, are not doing that. And those people are very attracted to tech, because they've done the numbers and worked out it's better. And so you've got this really interesting Venn diagram of entertainment and tech, which creates a different kind of technology. And so we're kind of like placed to kind of work on that. We also had been to San Francisco a lot and didn't love it as a place, and so therefore wanted to be able to serve our clients in San Francisco, but be somewhere where we could feel more passionate about the kind of cultural potential of the city. For whatever reason, San Francisco is a bit of a cultural desert, and so therefore it felt a bit weird spending lots of time there. And I personally spent a lot of time there and got very bored of it very quickly. Which sounds incredibly ungrateful, but always best to be truthful in life. Then Berlin, very fascinated by what's happening there as a city. But as I said to you earlier on, Chris, that one of my team had said to me that he wanted to move to Berlin. And so therefore I believed in investing in him as a person to go there and could kind of like build a new piece. And I think, so to kind of come around to answering your question, a lot of people have come organically, where I've got people that work at Koto who came as an intern and never left. I've got people that came as a freelancer and never left. We've got very good staff retention. I think we're at like 5 or 6 people that have ever left now, which is a pretty good thing considering how long we've been going. And so it has kind of 2 outcomes, that, which is, one, it makes a very strong kind of family network feel, because a lot of people have been for a long time, and so therefore they've got the codes of like a family culture, in jokes, reminiscing about the past, gossip, all the things that you would expect any community to have, which is kind of like its bonds that ties together. And then also what's happened is in the starting of the LA and the Berlin studio, people from London have moved to those 2 cities. And so therefore there's a continuation of community in those places as well. And it's just like any kind of diaspora, where a culture moves somewhere else and you still celebrate your culture in the same way because that's what you've done. And so therefore, as you add more people in those two cities to their culture, you are kind of creating new versions of it, but it still has the same background. And so that's the same as if you were to go to any kind of immigrant neighborhood in another big city. It's like where it comes from, but it's an echo of it. And so it has its own kind of like amendments and changes. In terms of the way that we think about people, so we've got 3 core values at Koto, which are just cadence, uncompromising positivity, and relentless hustle. Relentless hustle is about the fact that actually what we do is a hard industry to work in, and as much as it's fun and we have a laugh and everything, it requires a lot of us, it requires a lot of energy, and we always have to be kind of thinking on our feet, changing. It's not like we've got a process, that's it, stick down to it. We have to kind of always reinvent. Uncompromising positivity, because setbacks will happen and they will always happen, and so therefore we know that we have to approach each day with that. And you know, in London we've got these kind of old gates on this old forge that we work in, which I'm sat in right now, and I always say to people, we just have to drop the rest of our lives at the gate, because as much as we all will feel what's ever going on in our lives, is that positivity has to come into our work, and so that's really important. And then just cadence has got 2 meanings to it, which is, one is about the simplicity of what it means when people are working together, you know, just like the peloton, which is all about cadence, and people, you know, someone goes to the front and then people kind of slipstream behind. We have to do that. You know, we can't all have a good day every day, and so some days, you know, if someone's having an off day, we have to rely upon our teammates to be able to have a good day for us to get through it. And then the second part of that is about doing the right thing. You know, the just part is like not utilizing our skills and abilities for the wrong client, try and avoid wankers, try and put good things out in the world. We don't make lots of extra stuff that the world doesn't need. We try to be responsible and light in our footprint where we can be. It's an incredibly complex world in terms of, like, you know, what's good and what's bad, and the way that all those things work, but we're very aware of that stuff. And you know, so we've turned down a lot of companies in the loan space, for example. We've avoided working with some companies where we felt like their business model was exploitative. You know, we've done a lot of stuff that's kind of conscious on that front, to try and be careful on that front. And then kind of like in the building of where we've got to now, we've got good senior leadership team that have been, a majority have been with the company for a long time. We've got a good diversity of cultures, of people. You know, it's not just lots of white British blokes, which it could be very easily, because that's obviously a dominant part of our industry. But at the same time, we also acknowledge the fact that we have a British DNA at our core, and it's no different than someone like Apple and a lot of the British designers that work there. I think there's something about British design education which makes people have a really good combination of being slightly skeptical, which then kind of, and then slightly kind of tall poppy syndrome, which then pushes you to then think about stuff in a different way. And so, you know, we are British in our DNA, but we also have brought a lot of different people into different worlds around that. And the way it works is we've essentially got 3 departments. We've got creative department, which is mainly designers across branding, UI, animation, illustration, photography. And then we've also got a strategy department, which is writers and strategists. And then we've got the client services team that makes sure that we try and do everything when we say we're going to do it, and all those important parts of running a business, finance, etc., etc. And we just work in small teams of 4 or 5 across those 3 departments with all of our clients.
Wow, it's incredible. It sounds like such a smooth, well, I'm sure it's not all the time internally, but from the external, it feels like such a, you know, considered. And when we started talking earlier about the idea of mid-90s guy in an ill-fitted suit barking at the juniors, it sounds like we just mentioned there, it's like the ultimate, you know, evolution of the industry, of where you wanted it to be, and it's a result of maybe those experiences that you had. That's like the perfect, well, to me, it sounds like the perfect sort of progression.
I think for me, it's an interesting thing, which, and I completely understand where it comes from, but I think there's a lot of people that have what I describe as like assumed cooperation, which is, I've worked for a company that does the same thing as this company I'm going to work for. So if all of us go and sit in a room, we'll just get on with it and we'll work it out, and then there'll be an outcome. And yeah, there will be an outcome, and quite often that can be really creative. But I think a lot of people start companies because they're really good at a thing and don't realize that when you start a company, you're probably going to be doing a lot less of that thing, and you're going to be doing a lot of other stuff. And so I think on our part, on my and my co-founders, Joey and Caroline's part, we've been really, really conscious to go, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Why are we doing it? What are our inputs that we can put there? And so, you know, we've got input diversity of everything from US Navy SEALs who practice a thing called extreme ownership, which is incredibly powerful as a kind of day-to-day thing to own, which is whatever problem goes wrong within the organization it's my problem, and I have to own that problem day in, day out, every day. And if someone else makes a mistake, that's my mistake. It's not just their mistake. And so, and you know, that's kind of one side of it, through to Buddhist approach to the beginner's mind and thinking about the way that you approach creative challenges, and you don't just come up with the same response again and again, and you have to kind of constantly reinvent. We've got all these inputs that we think are really important because we wanted to be successful, because I think our time is finite, and so therefore I want to spend my time in something that I'm doing that has a positive outcome, but also I enjoy along the way. But also just because I owe that to the other people that work here, because we ask a lot of them by the effort that they put in, day out. You know, when we work at speed, we create a lot of work, and that's something that's been commented on online before, is our kind of sheer outcome. And that's because we've tried to remove inefficiencies or conflict or those other things. And so therefore it's my responsibility as the kind of one of the founders, but also the leader, to be able to say, we're doing this is why we're doing it, and then to kind of make sure that we're doing it in the best way possible. And so it suits everyone, and people feel, you know, that they're kind of they're working somewhere that respects that. That said, we fail just like everyone else, and I'm constantly learning, and I want to get better at a lot of stuff. But it's I think it's a lot of conscious thought on my part.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Before we just move on to more about the specifics of the work, James, you've got a couple of questions that have popped up that I think are really interesting. Josh mentions how about a transition from being creative director at Design Studio, or a creative at another agency, to then being ultimately a direct competitor.
Yeah, it's a tough one, that one. It's an interesting one, which is, you know, I think one of the ways that we talk about it at Koto is that when we're doing kind of annual reviews and all that kind of stuff, is we always say, look, we're not working on this kind of blind assumption that you're going to stay here forever. We acknowledge that one day you might leave, or you might start your own agency, or you might go and work at the competition or whatever. And so we always talk to people about their own personal development and the time they're going to spend with us, but we also talk about their future and what lives beyond that. And so that's just something that comes from my past a bit as well, which is, I think it would be pretty obvious to anyone that I work with at Design Studio that I would leave and start my own company. But it is complicated when you're suddenly in competition with the people that you were previously working for. And I think, you know, the history of that is within the industry is that some people do it well, some people don't do it well. For me personally, when we first started, we weren't in competition because there was three of us, and you know, we were doing everything in a much kind of smaller place, and we're doing little things for little people, which, you know, they wouldn't have touched. And I think over time it's been interesting to then kind of get to a situation where we are competitors now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Danny's just added as well, what's some of the proactive ways you get clients without being more of a legacy driven thing, or based upon referral?
What's the proactive way? Sorry, someone was talking. What's the proactive way that we get clients?
Yeah, the ways to search it. Is it more of a legacy relationship? Is it more referral, just again from what people see of you, or is it, you know, without digging too much in the secrets of how you go about it?
It's a magic question. I have always been of the conclusion that I very much subscribe to the build it, they will come model, which is, and I've been through with a lot of companies, a lot of new business processes. I've been through the process where you have a company that works for you. I've worked with the internal new business person that's ringing people up saying, oh, do you want a brand? I've worked with the kind of, you know, all of these different things on that front. And I've come to the conclusion that it's pretty simple, which is you have to do great work. You have to be really clear about why your work is good and what the difference it can make. And then over time, you will create a network and builds around that. Now that's really hard when people are first starting out, because that isn't a thing. But the way that we did it when we first started was that so I'd saved quite a bit of money with my co-founders. And then we went back to paying ourselves a very low wage when we first started, which was just, we knew we had to do that. And we had 3 laptops in a dusty old room, which was very cold in the winter. And we just built it from there. And I think off the back of that, I think my personal reputation was something that got us some work. My network was something that got us some work. We ended up working with some clients that had left places, that had done stuff. But then also we did a job early on where they were really happy with it. They told some other people, which got us some stuff. And so it was, it was just that kind of that relentless hustle bit for the first year and a half while we tried to build up. And then that's absolutely ridiculous situation. But somebody that followed me on Twitter added our name onto a list of people that Coca-Cola could work with, because he thought that we could do good work, and that landed us on the pitch list to rebrand Fanta, which was ridiculous, and we were completely outside at that point of view. We were in New Zealand working on another project for another client that we kind of met through a friend of a friend when this Fanta pitch came in, and so I ended up working with Joey where we were doing an 8-hour day in New Zealand in his client's office, and then in an Airbnb in Wellington, we were doing 6 or 7 hours of work on the Fanta pitch, and then also getting friends back in London to help us on this Fanta pitch. And then we delivered the pitch for that, and then we won that. And from that day onwards, everything just got a little bit easier. And I always look back as that being like a real fulcrum moment in the story where we did this pitch. I sent it off. To be totally honest with you, we got paid for the pitch, and it wasn't very much. I think it was like $5,000, but at the time that was a lot of money to us. And I thought, you know what, even if we don't get that, we made $5,000 there. That's, that's good for the bank balance. And I remember one Friday night we got rung up and told that we'd won it. And that was like the real moment when we went from that kind of like slight dusty hustle, like trying to put bits together. Everything was a bit, we at that point, if something had broken, we would have been a bit fucked. Through to a situation where suddenly we could, and what was great about that was as soon as we did that work, we could put it in our credentials. And then we also won a rebrand of Gumtree not long after that. And so I suddenly went from showing work that I'd done at previous agencies as a kind of like, this is what we're capable of, and here's some small stuff we've done, to got Gumtree rebrand, got Fanta rebrand, and that opened the door for a lot of other stuff for us. And so it was about survival to that moment in time.
Yeah, and those tipping points, that seems to be quite common, whether it's really public, large scale sort of stuff, or just privately things where you tip the scales in terms of the size of the client or the value of the project. That's quite a common story. Yeah. But a little bit before we started this, like I was saying, there seems to be a tendency at the moment from the people I speak to that you step into that project immediately, or you start an agency and go, look, I've got a shiny new website and logo. Can I have the new Nike rebrand or something? The concept that is always repeated is that it's just hard work, slog, long hours, dedication, passion, all of those sort of things. Those core skills that anybody that starts a project or a business should have. And if you do it for the other reasons, then it ultimately leads to failure, I think.
Yeah, it's Gladiator when he says hold the line. It's like it's absolutely that all over. You've just got to and lots of people don't, and then they throw their hat in, and I completely understand that because it's hard work, and being skint is rubbish, and all those kind of things. But if you hold the line, and you believe in yourself, and you've got the ability, then it will come, and that's the thing. You've just got to do that.
But being skint is better than being dictated to.
Sometimes.
Depends who you are. Yeah, just a couple more questions, James, before we just move on. Again, I keep on pushing the work bit back. I'm more fascinated about the background and the story behind it, really. But Zoe has mentioned, we talked about a gap between education and industry. And as a final year student, what do you think is lacking from majority of folios that you see, perhaps making them, they would be more successful if there was a component or something in there that's commonly lacking?
Think about who you're approaching, I think, is my whole thing that I always say to students, which is if you're got like you set your sights on working somewhere or working in a certain part of the industry or whatever, those people want to see something that reflects in themselves in what you're sending, whether that's like tonality, whether that's, it's human nature. If I meet somebody, I'm going to look for our common bonds from the off, and that's how you get to know people, and that's how you build relationships. And I think too many students think, well, here's all this stuff I've made, it's a monument. And what's actually quite simple is that, if you are sending a PDF portfolio around, you can change that quite easily. You change the colors on the cover, you can change the words you use, you can make stuff if you're really serious about it. And I think too many people come out of university and go, here's my thing, it's fixed, I'm just going to go and show it to everybody. And actually, it isn't a printed portfolio that it was when I left. It's something digital, it lives and breathes. You need to think about, like, making that thing and adapting that thing, you know. And the young student, kind of like graduates that I've hired at Koto, have all displayed that in coming to us. They have shown that kind of something that feels like it's not just an outcome of 6 things they did at university and that's it, and now I've got to go and find a job.
Yeah. Again, that's something I've mentioned a lot to people, you know, relating to who it is, you know, being a bit more personal, a bit more bespoke. You don't have to create a brand new portfolio, but if you're giving the person you're aiming this at a reason to sort of sit up compared to the other 5,000 you probably see on a weekly basis, then it just makes you react more, doesn't it? Again, it's a bit like what you say. I've noticed in the work that you guys do and some of the case studies and the stuff on the site about this human emotion, you know, this connection that you want people to have with the brands you create to make them pick that product or service more than another one. I think that's the same sort of thing, isn't it? And again, it goes back to talking about the Koto branding, or you know what you stand for, as opposed to just picking a word out of a dictionary, or you know, doing it like an old rock and roll band might do. You know, it's about having something that's also got the same relevance and the same emotion and the same connection. It's all of these things, isn't it?
Yeah. So Koto means that. So in Japan, if something's got just a practical use, it's called mono. And then if you give something Koto, it's about making it aesthetically and emotionally engaging. Nice. And I just thought when I heard about that, that's such a parallel for what we do. Want to elicit emotions from people day in, day out. Yeah. Such an important thing.
Yeah. So I'll just one other question that's dropped in on the back of Zoe's talking about the students and the folios. Is Fahud has asked about what do you think would come next in involving the industry from of all, you know, whether it's students or people that have been within the profession, but things that are, you know, talents or skills that you think are important for people to show moving forward. And obviously, from my perspective, there's been a lot more kinetic type, a lot more motion, a lot more emotion in work, and not just, you know, not just fixing a hole. Is there something that you think that would be beneficial for people to start to develop themselves, you know, self-initiative?
Yeah, I think making things move is pretty crucial these days. I think being able to put these things on any surface, you know, I think I still see a lot of portfolios that have got newspapers and stuff in, which I completely appreciate because it's tactile, it's nice, you can make it, you can hold it, it feels good, etc., etc. But it's not so relevant in the world as much as, however anyone wants to say print will never die. Not sure I don't quite agree with that one. I think it will always exist, but it will only exist within a certain space. I think, you know, we're at a point where screens, whether we like it or not, are going to be everywhere soon because the price is getting to the point where it'll be cheaper for the supermarket to cover their shelves in screens, but it will be for them to print out shelf edge labels that advertise stuff. And then they'll do exactly what's happened with digital media, which is, oh, look at that, we can sell it 4 times over. And so, you know, you drive anywhere and it's got, you know, rotating ads. Supermarkets and everything will do the same thing. And so therefore, I think we're going to see a proliferation of screens, and within that, motion will be the differentiation. And I think a lot of people will be set up to still think about things statically. And so the one thing we do at the moment is that all of our brands we make have a motion component to them. We've thought about how they're going to move even before they do move. So I think that's a really important thing. I think we live in what we describe at Koto as the new era of attention as well, which is like we have never had more things calling for our attention. So this idea of kind of the monolith of, you know, TV, media, and a few other things. It's like we can look at, you know, anything all day. And so within that, I think understanding how you exist within that space. And so at Koto, we've got three gates which we look for our brands to go through, which has to be true. We're not about selling lies about anybody. Have to be completely honest because you'll just get caught out on a lie in the long run. Has to be distinctive because everyone has competition, whatever they're doing, doesn't matter what it is. And if you haven't got competition now, you will soon. So it has to really stand out. And it has to be compelling. And compellingness comes not just from visual, but also comes from verbal identity. And I think one of the things I see again and again is people saying, oh, I don't really write. And it's like writing, I completely and utterly believe is a skill that people can learn. And so I think particularly for younger designers, get a handle on writing and use it within your work. It's so important.
So, and just going back to that motion, James, that's obviously then a real core component if you from starting. I remember when I first started in the industry and it was paper-based only. So it was just a static, you know, logo, maybe added some fluff around it, and then that gradually progressed into being much more digital. But that's now one of the initial core components when you start of how that can be moved?
No, it's more about kind of like at its inflection point when we first created. how is this then also going to move? What's going to happen? How are we going to bring this to life in that way? What are the things that we can do to kind of like create that, you know? And I think it's interesting. We've got Netflix and Spotify as clients, and in both those situations, when we make work for them, we're quite often creating stuff that appears within these very, very powerful product platforms where people are spending a lot of their time. And if you don't think in motion within that, then that's just going to die compared to everything else. You know, if I'm creating something that is existing within Netflix's UI, I need to make sure that that's doing a very good job of capturing those people's attention, because there's a lot of stuff that you can look at or process in here, and similarly with Spotify. And so it's more about a mind state, which is like, I've always got one eye on how this is going to move. How is it going to move? What's the movement going to do? When's movement appropriate? That kind of stuff, rather than it necessarily starting at inception. It's more about that inflection when we kind of start to settle on something.
Yeah, and what I've really liked, something I spotted over the last couple of weeks, is in sites like Netflix and YouTube and all those that are very energetic, very loud. You know, you've got to shout. Sometimes it feels like you've got to shout louder than everybody else. Your Skyscanner work, and there's in the folio there's a billboard mock-up, but it's got that real subtle sort of movement of the, I think it's a palm tree of
Yeah.
some sort. But it's like a shadow, and it's really interesting how the opposite of what you expect motion to always be, you know, fast-paced or really sort of in your face. That was a real. It's clever how that made you feel relaxed, like you hope to do on holiday. Or
well, yeah, we were talking about the memory of that. Came out of the idea of memory of holiday, and it's like, you know, whether you're lying on a sun lounger and you get that nice reflection, you finally feel relaxed, or whether you're, you know, in an Airbnb in New York and you can hear the horns honking outside and you can see the light kind of changing on the wall or whatever. Rather than trying to sum up the place with one kind of high saturated cheesy photo of it, I think more about those kind of like secondary things that we all feel, because I think all of us will feel that. But, you know, New York, is it Empire State Building? Is it Statue of Liberty? Was it the Twin Towers? What's the one image? Well, there isn't one, but there is that feeling which you get across the whole of Manhattan. So it's better to focus on that. Similarly to the fact that we were talking about, you know, going to Tokyo or something, you can imagine having this idea of the blossom, what that feels like coming out, the falling blossom, this kind of really nice light breeze. Don't matter how good the photographer is, they're not going to get all that kind of evocative feeling. And so the idea there was about trying to like ascend ourselves beyond kind of cheesy travel photography, which has no power or impact anymore because it's just done to death.
Yeah, and it's funny because it all, however much I ask these things or think about them or talk about them, they all filter back down to that emotive nature of, you know, connecting to what we as humans sort of what we feel towards something. It all seems to bubble back down to that, which is really, really I suppose that's testament to what you guys are all about and what you do. And just talking about just going more directly to the work, it seems so energetic. You mentioned positivity. It all just seems so bright and energetic. You know, is that a real? Sounds a bit of a daft question, I suppose, but is that a real conscious effort to say that's a core principle of what we do, or is that just the collaborative nature of the team? Is that just the minds involved? Is that just the way you view the world?
I think that's very much down to me and my co-founder Joey. We're both pretty like optimistic about stuff, and I think that's partly what we're energetic, like kind of naturally attracted to. But then there's an interesting point, which I don't know when this happened, but at some point you get known for something, and then expectation comes, and therefore when people come to us, they also have this expectation of having looked at our portfolio. So I think, you know, at the moment our website's been getting done for about a year, and we're a bit behind on it. But a lot of people come to us having looked at our Instagram, and what's quite interesting about Instagram is you get this kind of overview of our portfolio as this series of small squares. And on my number one feeling that they get out of that is kind of that energy, that color, that kind of that pop. And so therefore, you know, we've done a couple of projects recently where I've presented like completely black and white routes, hasn't got all that in it, it's a bit more Swift, a bit more minimal. And people are like, wasn't expecting that from you. No, I don't want that. Thanks very much. And so I think you become a kind of, you become a hostage to your own fortune after a while, I think.
Yeah, a bit like an actor getting typecasted.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
I know I'm just conscious that we're running towards the end, James. I've just got a few more questions that have popped up. Let me see what's pops in there. So Will has asked, do you still see ideas reigning supreme, or is ability of a designer more important?
Yeah, no, I'm an absolute ideas fascist. So I'm like, if people can't explain what the idea is and they just show me that something looks nice, it gets knocked back pretty quickly. So ideas are everything, really. is such an important part. Doesn't mean that you can't then give that idea all the love and the craft that it needs to be completely, I've never been a massive fan of the kind of awards thing where you get this kind of like, oh, look at that, it's a really clever idea, but it's just kind of is what it is. And I think you can always make an idea better by bringing it to life. But yeah, no, always have to have as solid ideas as possible.
Yeah. And then there's a couple here that are relatively the same from Laura and Joseph about once the pandemic is over, or even during pandemic, should people, students or young people, all those, stepping into the industry, should they look to jump and start their own, or is it still really advisable to learn the craft, go through the process, or is it just a personal preference and desire?
I don't think starting your own company straight out of university is a good idea. I think you're going to make so many more mistakes than if you went and worked for somebody else for a couple of years, because you're going to learn so much in such a short period of time. And I, both at Koto, but before my life at Koto at various other companies, I've employed a lot of young people, and it's always fascinating to watch in the first 3 to 6 months to see them go like, oh, right, wow. And it's just like, it's kind of like wave of like how things are done, how you make things, what you can do things quicker, et cetera, et cetera. And I know a couple of people really well, and I'm not going to name them, who've got agencies that they started at a very young age. And when I talk to them about the way that they do stuff, I'm like, oh my God, because they didn't know any better. And it's like, these are people that are now in their late 30s who run agencies, and and it's frustrating for the people that work for them. They're a bit like stuck in their ways about stuff. Why is everyone in such a hurry? Like, go and learn your craft somewhere else. You could be just, it's like any trade. If I was going to be, no matter how practical or how brilliant I was, if I was going to set up in the building trade, I'd go and work for someone else, because I'm going to learn so much practical, real world stuff day in, day out. And yeah, at some point I'll get to a point where I'm not learning at the frequency or the inclination. The world's a bit too much in a hurry for me. I think
there's also
a little bit more slow thinking wouldn't hurt to kind of like help people get, because you're going to get there quicker. Because like, I would definitely say us having worked in other agencies for so long before starting makes our failure and mistake ratio a lot lower than other agencies, because we know not all of them, but we know a lot of the mistakes that people commonly make.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other things that go beyond the creative, the visual sort of stuff that everybody sees on everywhere, websites and portfolios and social media. There's a hell of a lot of things that you need to learn, even just people skills or development of team members. Or
no point in being good at design if you can't sell it. It's absolutely pointless.
Well, exactly, yeah. But that comes with understanding the world, isn't it? And being amongst other people and learning from the failures and the successes of others, and how to and how not to do things, isn't it? But, one final question, which I think is quite important in today's world, is do you think Instagram has affected design and the sort of the culture of the industry and what people perceive it to be, or what clients potentially think they're getting, or is it a nice balance if done genuinely? Or
I don't have a particular issue with Instagram. I think it's quite a powerful tool. So I think a lot of people see a lot of stuff. I think my only worry with kind of Pinterest and Instagram culture is that it overloads people, and people have too many influences, and so therefore it like makes them a bit rabbit in the headlight, because I've got so many things I could do and I don't know which one I'm going to do. So I think it's about being careful not to have too much, because I think it can be a bit of a sugar high and you can just get a bit exhausted by this waves and waves of good stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. Superb. Well, apart from just quickly asking about the future of Koto, I know that's a difficult question to sort of pinpoint, but is there any master plan, any idea about what's next? Is it just to continue to churn out the the work that you guys, not churn out, that's the wrong phrase, continue to produce the quality work that you guys do?
It's an interesting one. I think we have lots of different ideas on different days. I think we will definitely not always just be an agency. I think there'll be some other things that we might do or bring out in the world. But in the mode that we're at the moment, I think we're still building. We're still making something. I don't think it's a fixed asset. So I think the aim for there is to do that. And I think particularly personally, I'm very interested about creating the brands of tomorrow. So I've been doing a lot of work with early stage startups to try and get them thinking about their brand as early as possible. I think I've got a lot of work to do on that front to convince a lot of people. So that's kind of like our near-term goal on that front.